The earthquake swarm started in early July near the town of Perry, Alaska. At first, locals felt only a few dozen small quakes, nothing too worrisome. But by mid-August, more than 1,000 had struck. One of them was big enough to rattle windows and make people gasp, but none were really cause for serious concern. Then came the 7.1 magnitude earthquake on July, which cut off road access to Perry from the rest of the state. It also brought up images like this one from a local church, where part of the floor had suddenly risen several inches. No damage or injuries were reported, so life went back to normal. Almost. Just 2 weeks later, on July, another quake shook the town. This one was bigger, a 7.6 magnitude. By now, roads were too damaged to be used, so emergency services couldn't get in and many residents left the town altogether. 3 months after that, we're still waiting for any real resolution. As of November, there have been over 3,000 earthquakes in the area, including 30 with magnitudes greater than 5. Some scientists say it could go on for years. It's the biggest earthquake swarm in recorded history. And some scientists are worried about what's gonna happen next because there is a much bigger rumble in the jungle. But wait, if the worst earthquake swarm in recorded history happened in 2023, how can there be an even bigger one coming in 2025? Well, scientists are not actually predicting that the swarm will continue all the way until 2025. They are predicting that the activity level will continue at around the current pace until 2025. That's why they're concerned and why you should be too. It all comes down to what's happening beneath the surface of the Earth here. The New Madrid Seismic Zone is a mostly submerged region that stretches from New Madrid, Missouri to Charleston, Arkansas, right through the heart of the Mississippi Delta. It has produced some of the most powerful earthquakes in U.S. history. In 1811 and 1812, a series of quakes, some estimated to be over 7.2 magnitude, shook the region causing widespread damage. New Madrid is one of 5 major seismic zones in the United States, the others being along the west coast. But New Madrid is unique because it is capable of producing large earthquakes in an area that was previously thought to be incapable of such activity. And that's important because unlike the west coast, New Madrid does not lie on the edge of a tectonic plate. It is locked in the middle of the North American plate, far from any traditional fault lines. Scientists used to think the quakes here were caused by ancient buried faults in the crust. But today they believe something else is going on. Deep within the New Madrid Seismic Zone, water from the Gulf of Mexico is seeping into the cracks of the overriding North American plate. There it creates immense pressure hundreds of miles below the surface where rocks are hot enough to turn it into hot water. That hot water, supercritical carbon dioxide, then dissolves parts of the surrounding rock, creating small pockets of empty space. When the CO2 bubbles out of the solution, those gas bubbles can form big caverns. And when the caverns collapse, it releases energy that radiates outward in the form of seismic waves, causing earthquakes. In other words, the earthquakes here are being caused by water, not tectonic plates. Now, not every place where water interacts with hot rocks creates earthquakes. There must also be a significant amount of friction between the plate and the rocks below it. Scientists aren't exactly sure why there is so much friction here, but it may have to do with the dense clay layers within the Mississippi embayment, the lowlands created by the Mississippi River over millions of years. Whatever the reason, the result is a ticking time bomb. You see, when you exert a lot of pressure on a fault line, it causes stress to build up. Eventually, that stress becomes too much for the rocks to handle and they break, releasing all the built-up energy at once in the form of an earthquake. We don't know how much pressure is currently building up in the New Madrid Seismic Zone, but based on historical records, scientists estimate that a magnitude 7.7 earthquake is overdue by at least 75 years. A 2014 study put the odds of a 7.7 or larger quake happening in the next 50 years at about 7 to 10%. But those numbers only take into account the data that we have. There could be much more pressure than we expect, meaning the risk of a big quake could be much higher. And that's not even considering the possibility of a tsunami. You see, while most of the largest earthquakes in the world occur along the edge of tectonic plates, the vast majority of the largest tsunamis also occur in the middle of plates, far from any plate boundaries. Tsunamis are ocean-going waves that are caused by sudden shifts in the seafloor. So even though the New Madrid Seismic Zone is buried deep beneath the Mississippi River, scientists believe it has the potential to generate a devastating tsunami. In 2009, researchers estimated the potential run-up height of a tsunami generated by an 8.2 magnitude earthquake in the New Madrid Seismic Zone. Their conclusion, up to 100 feet in the Mississippi Delta and up to 5 feet along the Gulf Coast. To put that into context, the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami had a maximum wave height of around 100 feet, while the largest wave ever recorded was a staggering 1,000 feet high. The difference is the shape of the coastline. The Mississippi River creates a funnel shape that would draw the water inwards. Unlike coastal areas, the flat landscape of the delta could also channel the water, potentially causing even greater damage. The actual inundation area would depend on the precise location and depth of the earthquake as well as the time of day it happens. Since a tsunami is ocean water sloshing back and forth until it eventually comes to rest. If it hits during low tide, it could reach further inland. If it hits during high tide, it could cover less ground but be much taller. At this point, it might seem like I'm trying to stir up some unfounded doomsday fears. But this isn't science fiction. This is science scary. The reality is, we have very little time to prepare for a major earthquake in the central US. It hasn't happened before in modern times, so we have no recent precedent to work from. Most of the country's emergency planning has focused on earthquakes along the west coast, so there are no established regional protocols for dealing with a central US earthquake. There is no comprehensive plan in place to deal with the infrastructure damage, let alone the potential tsunami. The last major earthquakes in the new Madrid Seismic Zone happened more than 200 years ago. Back then, the US was a very different place. Much of the country's infrastructure was made without considering earthquakes at all, let alone ones with tsunamis. Today, the Mississippi River carries both cargo and passenger traffic, and there are oil pipelines everywhere. A strong earthquake here would cause extensive damage, especially since there are no large cities nearby to absorb the impact. Memphis, Tennessee is the closest major city and it's more than 100 miles away. But there are plenty of towns in the path of potential tsunami that are much closer. The town of Tiptonville, for example, sits just 27 miles from the epicenter of the 1811 earthquake. And there are towns along the river that are only 10 miles away. Now, don't get me wrong, there are some encouraging signs. Between the swarm in 2009 and 2010 and the swarm in 2023, there was a lull in activity that lasted more than a decade. But even during that time, scientists didn't consider it to be safe. In 2011, they issued a statement saying the period of calm was probably the eye of a storm and urged people to use the time to prepare. Turns out they were right. In a way, it was the calm before the storm. So what should you do? Well, first, you should subscribe for our upcoming video on what you can do to prepare for the next big earthquake. The best thing you can do today is to be informed. Find out what your local emergency management agency is doing and ask them questions. Volunteer to help with preparedness efforts. Check in on your elderly neighbors and make sure they have a plan. If you live near a river, find out what the evacuation routes are and how you would get to safety. These are the things that will make the biggest difference. This video was made possible by my patrons. If you'd like to support us directly and get early access to our videos, please visit our support page. Thank you for watching and I'll see you next time.